Ralph W. McGeehee is someone that patriotic mothers would love, and it seems he was for 25 years a member of the CIA, came a blue-collar family, made his way up the hard way, worked, Notre Dame football team, 25 years CIA, and he won the very prestigious Intelligence Medal for excellent work, and he's written a book called Deadly Deceits. And it's published by a new press called Sheridan Square Publications, and it's a powerful and very revelatory work, and he's my guest today, Ralph McGehee, and his story, and his, some might say, loss of innocence and discoveries.
It was late one night in December 1968 in Jiadin province near Saigon. Angered and miserable, I was sitting alone in the living room of a villa sparsely furnished with standard government-issue tables. I sat there in agony, thinking about all that had led me to this private hell. My idealism, my patriotism, my ambition, my plans to be a good intelligence officer to help my country fight the communist scourge. What in the hell had happened? Why did we have to bomb the people we were trying to save? Why were we napalming young children? Why did the CIA, my employer for 16 years, report lies instead of the truth? I hated my part in this charade of murder and horror.
That was some 5 years ago, was that? 68, what am I talking, 15 years ago.
Yes.
And you had served for about 15 years then.
Right, right. Uh-huh.
What led to this moment, as you were sitting in your office, in your living room, rather, in Saigon, this moment? Why, at that moment, did you come to that? And so this is how the story begins.
I had joined the agency after leaving Notre Dame. I went to Tilden here in Chicago, and from there to Notre Dame. And I joined the agency during the 50s, early 50s, the Senator McCarthy years, when he was waving lists of 205 card-carrying communists working in the State Department. And I was very thrilled to be recruited by the Central Intelligence Agency to go fight the communist scourge. And for 15 years, I very much believed in the CIA. I had served in the total time that I was in the agency in the 25 years. I'd served in Japan, in the Philippines, Taiwan, 3 tours in Thailand and a tour in Vietnam. And I had sort of crossed the spectrum, jobs as an intelligence gatherer, as a covert operator, as a paramilitary officer, as an intelligence analyst. But this particular time in Jiadin, I'd finally come to realize that nothing I could do would make the agency report the truth about what was going on in Vietnam. I'd first recognized that it wasn't reporting the truth the year earlier. This was in Thailand, when I was in the Northeast province. And I found out that in that one province alone, the Communist Party had about 2,500 adherents living in the villages. And the agency was reporting that there were 2,500 communists in the entire country, and they were guerrillas, and they didn't have any popular support of the people. And I found that there were 2,500 in that province, and they were living in the villages, and they were very much committed to a communist victory. I run all sorts of applause for the reports I turned in on this information. And then all of a sudden I was called to Bangkok and told to go home. And the project was canceled, and the agency's intelligence went right back to the same old story. There are only 2,500 communists in the entire country.
Let's pick up on that. You were complimented on your reports, which turned out to be true, and yet you were called in and told to go home. Could you go back and recount that? Why was that?
Well, I didn't know at the time. I thought maybe I had some political difficulty or personal difficulty with someone in the station. I didn't realize who it would be, but I thought maybe it was some personal difficulty. But then when they told me that they're going to cancel this project, that was not only reporting the best information on the Communist Party, but was also defeating what was going on without any bloodletting that you normally have with counterinsurgency programs. This really caused my first break with the agency. Something's wrong. I thought, well, maybe this is just a localized problem. It just applies to Thailand or the station or my personal relations or something. And then they said they're going to cancel the project, and they did that. And then when I got back to headquarters, I saw that its intelligence ignored all the information that I provided. It could not be ignored. It was just irrefutable. I had not only I had the true names of all these people, I had their communist aliases, and the agency just wrote them off. They didn't exist. And I said, well, I tried to correct this back at headquarters, and I tried for about a year. And
headquarters in Langley, Virginia.
Langley, Virginia, right. And I was warned. I was told I would no longer be promoted because I was agitating and causing problems in the division, Far East Division, that handled Thailand. And I said, well, something's wrong. But I thought, well, maybe it's just Thailand. I don't know what it is. But I just can't sit here in Langley and watch Vietnam go down the tube. So I had to go out there and apply my techniques out there and try to help win the war. And when I was back at headquarters, I started reading reports about Vietnam and then reading books outside.
Bernard Fall and the others.
Fall and Douglas Pike and Michael Charles Conley. And I saw in those books everything that I had been trying to report about Northeast Thailand was also true of Vietnam, but the CIA's intelligence was only saying there were several 100,000 armed guerrillas who have absolutely no support of the people. And I said, well, I know that can't be true. Here are these books saying it's not true, and the Thai organizers that I had discovered had been trained at Vietnam, so if it was true for Thailand, it had to be true for Vietnam, that they had a massed, organized base. But there's no mention of it was in CIA reporting. Well, here's the most devastating war in our history, and there's no mention of this millions of people who were behind the enemy. I said, well, I've got to get out there and help save the situation. And I enlisted to go to Vietnam.
I mean, you were still in favor of the Vietnam War.
Yes, very much. We had to get out there and win.
Yeah.
That was my. This was after TET 68. And things were coming apart. I got to get out there and help. And I got out there and I started writing memos to the chief of station. I brought these books, Fall's books, Pike books, Charles Conley's books, and I told them the results of my surveys in Northeast Thailand, that Thai trainers had been trained in Vietnam, that they were following the standard procedures, and there's no mention of it being made in station reporting. And so we had to take corrective action. We had to adopt maybe the project that I'd used in Northeast Thailand. And I had been there for a couple of months and written several memos and talked to everybody I could talk to. And it was at this point I finally realized that I was just banging my head up against a stone wall, and I wasn't going to get anywhere. And this sort of destroyed me. My faith in the agency, which I had up until that time was really a company man. I wanted to do the best. I really believed in what we were doing. My faith in the agency, my faith in the goals of our programs in Southeast Asia, U.S. programs in Southeast Asia, all were coming into question. And at that point, I said, well, the best way to do it is just do away with yourself.
You reached that stage.
I reached that stage, and I finally said, well, maybe you can tell people later, if you stay and don't do this, you can tell people later what actually went on, and it might have some beneficial effect. So I did just.
In the meantime, William Colby, who was your superior, who was head of the CIA at the time, was reporting his views, what he got, to Congress. Why don't you offer that? We'll come back to you and your family as well, and your Taiwan experience, too, and to the kind of people who were employed, the con artists, too. But Colby was reporting, what did he want you to say then about there were 100 teams? Could you mind explaining that again?
Oh, this was about Laos.
That was Laos.
Right. He was the director, the East Asia division chief in the agency at that time. And he was briefing Congress on our programs in Laos. And we wanted to massive increases in the finances. So we were in pretty much instructed that we had to portray the situation as imbalance between the Pathet Lao, who were trying to overthrow what later I came to find out was a CIA-installed government. And the Hmong forces, the hill tribe forces that we were supporting, and we at that time had about 24 teams, and these are pretty much a ragtag group of teenagers, barely trained and a few arms and all. But the way we were to present this to Congress was that he just divided on paper these 24 teams into over 100 teams, and it looked like we had a major force in power, that they were armed and battalions and this and that, and all we needed was just additional money, and we would turn the corner if Congress would authorize this money. And we prepared all charts and maps, and the map showed the proper proportions between the reds side on the map, the colored, and the greens, our side, and it was just a total, fabrication.
And there were 12, say, 24. You made them 100.
We made them 100.
Yeah.
And actually, what you had then is maybe on paper, just on paper.
Yeah.
There was nothing really in the field. Several people in each team.
So when we see some of these charts on TV, as they did, or as in this today the president does, these charts are not always reflective of the truth.
Most likely they're not. Usually they're not.
But we're talking now about this. Name of your book is Deadly Deceits. You're talking about deception on an incredible scale here.
This is what I found out, that the CIA is a misinformation operation.
I'm thinking about what your training is too. You were taught also about the Soviet and Chinese monolith, as though there were no split between them.
Yes, that's exactly it. We're this international communist monolith that we had to fight, that was challenging our position around the world, and this was the justification for all the programs that we had to overthrow these various governments.
I'm thinking about. I want to ask you about the overthrow of governments. I'm thinking about this fantasy too, that the Chinese people would rise up against Mao and the others.
Yeah, we sponsored.
You were taught that?
Well, not precisely, but there was several operations.
Mm-hmm.
We were taught that the people were unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
Probably that they would rise up, but in directing a couple of military operations, invasions of China from Yunnan province, the theory was that the people would rise up and join in the insurrection and overthrow the government of Mao. And of course, the people were 100% behind Mao. They didn't want anything to do with Chiang Kai-shek. And the teams, the armies that went into Yunnan provinces in 51, 52, 53, were just decimated and driven back, and they settled in Burma and started the opium traffic trade that exists to this day.
You were in Taiwan, as you mentioned Chiang Kai-shek. You were in Taiwan. Here you have a remarkable experience, the employing of agents, and some were outright phonies, who was like Agent L1. Suppose you tell that story. It's a comical tale. At the same time, it's cost us dough and God knows how many lives.
Yeah, this was the operation that had gone on for years. The agent was recruited based on the fact that he said he had left behind in China dozens of teams with radios, and we didn't have any assets at all in China. Said, oh boy, here's something we really got to get on. So he started providing us intelligence, and we started providing him millions and millions of dollars. And this went on for years and years and years. Well, let's say 4 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. And then someone began to question, well, this stuff is getting pretty fantastic. And one of the liaison services told us that the address of this agent was the address of a clipping bureau. And finally someone began to slowly began to put two and two together, and we finally asked the agent to go to an offshore island installation and maintain radio contact with his teams from that offshore island. Of course, the purpose was to monitor his radio broadcasts. We couldn't locate them in the airwaves, and he wouldn't do it. Finally, he confessed that he didn't really have any teams in mainland. And it was only later that we found out that he was an intelligence officer for Chiang Kai-shek. And he had been loading our files over these years was pro-Chiang Kai-shek information and anti-Mao information.
Now, the guy who chose him, you find also some of these guys who are utterly incompetent or lying were all promoted along the ranks.
Yeah.
Whereas you, who were telling the truth, were bawled out all the time.
Well, this I found is a real personal irony that it seems to happen if you goof up bad enough, you get into the agency self-protection mechanism. And once you're into that mechanism, then you're going to rise because you know the secrets, not only of your own secrets, begin to learn the secrets of everybody else. Once you get into that channel, then you're protected because you're part of it. So, and I found in my own case, as soon as I became confident as an intelligence gatherer, then I was no longer suitable to be a CIA officer, because they just could not tolerate the truth about certain situations.
Because you were violating a certain ritual, I suppose, of the good old boys network.
That's part of it, yeah. And I was reporting information that they just could not tolerate. The fact that the communists might have had popular support in Vietnam.
Did they know, as a question, these ones, your superiors, whom you reported this to, who were saw you, did they know what you were saying was true deep down? Or were they just...
I think at the highest levels they did.
Yeah.
But at my level and around my level, most didn't, because the agency is so permeated by its own misinformation, and the structures are so built to baffle the production of accurate intelligence that you just live in this unreal world and you can't see outside of it. And if it hadn't been for my experience in Northeast Thailand, I probably would still be, I would be a high-level officer in the CIA right now.
Because it was your experience in Thailand that really opened your eyes.
That opened my eyes and made me begin to look critically at everything else.
And so that's when they called you back the first time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Really, they were telling you to behave yourself, weren't they? You know.
Well, they're taking me out of that situation so I couldn't report that information anymore, which, if allowed to report, it had ramifications for Vietnam, which would have meant that we had only one course of action in Vietnam, and it would be to withdraw and admit that the enemy owned the country.
When did, aside from your own personal experience, we'll come to that, to Southeast Asia and your own experiences, when did you discover about, we helped overthrow, say, the Arbenz legally elected government in Guatemala, and Mossadegh, we knocked him over in Iran, set up the Shah, and we helped knock off Lumumba. And when did you make that, how'd that come to you?
Just through magazine articles and newspaper articles. I didn't know anything about it through agency channels. At the time, to me, it seemed like a very acceptable thing to do. You know, if Mossadegh's causing us problems in Iran, we'll overthrow him and get somebody in there who will work for us.
See, we know there are an increasing number of whistleblowers, such as yourself. John Stockwell, who tells of his African experience. He was the Angola chief of the CIA.
Right.
And we know that Vic Marchetti and others along the line. So do you find this, by the way, are there more and more such as you coming out and speaking what you know?
I tend to think that there are going to be fewer and fewer. It took me 2 years to clear this book through the agency.
Why don't you talk about that, and then we'll come back to more of your experiences.
Okay.
It took you 2 years to clear this, because there's a remarkable story connected with this book and the difficulty in its publication. Why don't you start?
Because I signed the secrecy agreement when I joined the agency, I had to submit the book for clearance. And the first time I submitted it, I had written the book without any classified information as far as I could determine. I'd very carefully written it that way. And the agency made 397 deletions in it. And they said, well, I said, you can't say these are classified because most of the information is in books that you approved for other officers, or it's in the Pentagon Papers. And they put me in touch with a man to work over every deletion. Well, I proved to him in virtually every case that they were wrong, and I was right, because it was in the Pentagon Papers, because they had cleared the same information for friendly former officers, so they couldn't clear it for one person and then declare it classified for me. So finally worked it down to just maybe about 50 deletions, and these are minor things that I was able to change, and they released the version to me. Then I went shopping for a publisher, and finally Sheridan Square said, we'll publish it, but you've written it more as a academic paper rather than a book, so you have to put it in biographical format, which I did, and then I rewrote it, resubmitted it to the agency, and at this point I think they began to really get worried. Well, now he's got a publisher. He's really got a chance to do this thing, and they made up their mind that they weren't going to let me publish it. And they started reclassifying everything that they said was declassified before.
By the way, let's explain that. Before it was declassified, in fact, almost everything you have has been published. I mean, it's available to the public.
Yes.
Yes.
Pentagon
Papers, plus books by friendly CIA having the same information.
Uh-huh.
And so it sounds like they were harassing you.
Oh, they were just trying to stop me. More, I think it was even beyond harassing. They were trying to just keep me from publishing the book. Where in the case of other officers, they helped them and encouraged them to sometimes do the research for the books. In my case, they were trying to stop it. And I called attention to the general counsel, the lawyer I was working in a liaison with on this, that the law that they were operating under said that they may not reclassify information once it's been declassified. And his response was pretty much along the lines, well, that's tough. We are. They're just going to, they weren't going to let me get away with it. And I finally made an appeal to the Deputy Director of Central Intelligence Agency, who was then Admiral Robert Inman, and almost unheard of in dealing with national security agencies, he overturned the board, the Publications Review Board, in every single instance. And I thought, well, my problems are over now, and they'll be a little more reasonable from now on in. But that wasn't to be the case, because the next chapter I turned in said the whole chapter is classified. You can't use any of it. And I said, well, I'm not gonna put up with this anymore. So I went to a Washington Post reporter and said, here they're violating the law, and they're telling me they're violating the law, and they're telling me that's tough. And he wrote a long article in the paper, and this public embarrassment finally forced them to be reasonable. But it took me, and they finally, another session with this officer over a period of days, they finally cleared that version. But altogether, it took me 2 years to get the book cleared.
So it seems that obviously is an attempt, it sounds very deliberate, to discourage anything. More than that, to give you a rough time. So you're implying that it will discourage others, of course.
It will make it extremely difficult.
Now, President Reagan has a new directive, too. What does that do? Explain the directive.
The directive places under the same constraints of pre-publication review. Anyone who wants to make a speech, any writing, fiction or nonfiction, academic studies, nonfiction books like mine, they must, hundreds of thousands of government employees must now submit their writings and speeches to their parent agency. Anyone who sees sensitive compartment of information will fall into the same review. In effect, he's removed the freedom of expression. He's destroyed the First Amendment rights of just hundreds of thousands of government employees.
Well, it sounds like more and more government by secrecy.
The purpose of all of this, it is exactly government by secret. The purpose of all this is to prevent the American people from knowing what's going on. Because if the CIA is out overthrowing another country, they know very well know what's going on. We were trying to prevent the American people from knowing what's going on.
Just to remind the audience again that Ralph McGeehee, who was my guest for 25 years, CIA operative, remember who he is now. You were very gung-ho indeed. You were as patriotic as anybody could find. And you're talking now about a certain revelation in your own very life, in your own findings.
Yes. I did. I started out just tremendously proud of being in the CIA and worked very hard at being a good CIA officer. And then I just found out that the CIA was not an intelligence agency. For 15 years, I believed it was an intelligence agency. I found out it wasn't an intelligence agency. It was just a covert action agency. And its purpose was to overthrow other governments. and to mislead the American people about what was going on.
You know, as you're saying that, on this very day of this conversation, there's an item in the Chicago Sun-Times from Washington by Baltimore Sun correspondent Ernest Ferguson, and he speaks of the former CIA head Stanfield Turner, who says, I'm not opposed trying to overthrow the Sandinista government in Nicaragua. We should judge whether to overthrow any government, not by abstract morality, but which government is better for U.S. and the country involved. We are deciding, then, that even though a country, perhaps not Nicaragua, others, legally elected or there by virtue of a tremendous, overwhelming number of the people, it's not right. We don't like it. And so we can knock this off. This is what...
This is exactly what the agency is. It's done this in dozens and dozens of cases. I in the book have recorded, I think, about 20 cases, but I only know those that have been officially acknowledged, and I'm sure that the list goes on and on and on. I feel that we have enough problems trying to govern our own country and to try to sit here and determine what's best for another country is beyond our capability, and we don't have the moral right to do that either.
By the way, now it's domestic powers. How would it work domestically? We know it did during the 60s as far as the National Student Association, as far as labor groups. We know about that. What now? I mean, its power has increased rather than decreased.
President Reagan, in his executive directive of December 1981, has given the agency the right to conduct its covert operations within the United States. And this worries me very, very much.
How would that could affect somebody, say, a group that is dissenting, say?
Say
ministers, say a religious group.
Then it's my understanding if they can dream up any justification, say, well, there's probably some foreign money behind it or foreign influence behind it, well, then the agency is justified in spying on it, sending an agent into it and joining it, the group, and trying to control and manipulate the group. It gives it the right to work again with academicians. At one time, it had about 5,000 academicians on its payroll in about 100 different campuses. It gives it the right to work with the media again. It gives us the right to work with religious organizations, labor organizations, student organizations.
It's as though nothing had happened before. It's as though there were no past.
It's if we've forgotten everything that went wrong before. And this was, all those operations I was talking about was when it was illegal for the agency to do that sort of thing. Now
that's right. Now it's being made legal.
Now it is legal.
So
and
it's
you can
a step
imagine
beyond what it was.
It's just going to burgeon.
That's why you think there'll be less and less books, such as yours.
Less and less books, very much so, yes. That plus the difficulty they're throwing in the way of people from writing books.
We're going to continue with Ralph McGeehee and his adventures, to put it mildly, adventures and his discoveries in Southeast Asia, primarily is where you were, and also Philippines and Japan and... Well, more, and also the training, and also your family life. We have to talk about that. And the book, by the way, it's incredibly gripping reading and very disturbing, of course, but necessary. Sheridan Square, the publishers. The title is Deadly Deceits. The subtitle, My 25 Years in the CIA, for which he was honored again and again and again. And finally winning the big honor, as you retired, I'm sure much to their... satisfaction.
Yes.
They awarded you for your great work in Malaysia.
Right.
Now, you were never in Malaysia.
I was never in Malaysia. I had never even visited the country. I just don't know how they...
It gives you an idea, I suppose, of the actual not giving a damn, really, the carelessness, too.
Yeah, they did. Really. I have a letter of recommendation from them that reflected what was in my file, and it said that I was the outstanding analyst on Asian Communist parties, and yet for almost my entire years there, they ignored everything I said about Asian communism. So,
and they were happy you retired.
And they were very happy that I retired. Now they probably would have fired me because I was protesting the Vietnam War from 68 on, And the more I protested, the further and further away I was isolated. And finally I was given the silent treatment, given a desk and said, shut up. They would have preferred to fire me, but I think that they were worried that they'd have a loose cannon and the best to control me. And I think that medal was just a way of, trying to calm me.
That's the gold watch.
Yes.
Yeah. By that title itself tells your feelings, is it not? Deadly Deceits.
That's what the agency does. It is. It creates a lot of deaths around the world by its deception. And,
what do you call it? The CIA, you call it the covert
action arm of the president.
Covert
that
action.
allows him to make foreign policy, to overthrow foreign governments without getting the approval of Congress, without getting the approval of the American people. It gives him an alternative that lets him avoid the various blocks.
Now, this is beyond anything of previous presidents who also worked with the CIA. This goes beyond anything of the previous administration.
Well, President Reagan has issued various executive directives, without consulting Congress, that allows the agency to operate within the United States, that tightens the security of the agency, that makes anyone who names a CIA agent subject to a 10 years in prison, $50,000 fine. It's just making it more and more difficult for anyone to learn anything about the CIA.
We haven't asked about what happens to your family life. This is terribly important. You were, naturally, everything was secret. Your wife knew nothing for a long time as to what you did. And she, being human and intelligent...
She was very, very upset about this. I did tell her I worked for the CIA, but that was about the extent of it. And she was extremely angry that I wouldn't trust her and tell her what I was doing. And sometimes I'd go away for a couple of weeks, and she didn't know where I was going and when I'd come back. And,
also, talking about the attitude toward you, were very faithful and very efficient. Good. Their contempt, really, when you were ill, there was. No one take care of you.
That really worried me. This was when I was very much a company man, and I became violently ill when I was down in mid-south Thailand, in an isolated little town down there. And there was no regular communication, but the agency had its airline in the town, and one of the people I worked with sent a cable saying, "Hey, he's in the hospital. He's very seriously ill." And the response was pretty much, well, put him on the milk run military plane that comes up on Friday, which was 5 days later. And
now they have their own planes, Air
they
America,
had their own planes
that go fast.
That ran around the country just at whim.
They put you in the milk plane, though you were very serious, almost fatally ill.
According to doctors later when I got to Bangkok, I'd come within a nth of dying.
So you're really just a number to them, basically amounts to that. Since they consider things in the abstract anyway, and the world of fantasy, the CIA agent himself becomes nothing more than a digit.
Yes, I would agree to that. They certainly had no real concern for me at all, or for my family. I felt I recovered my faith in the agency after I recovered from my sickness. But it was a misplaced faith that I soon found.
No, I think this is interesting to me because it has to affect us as well, individually as well. Horrendous though it is as far as foreign policy is concerned, and the dough and the lives lost, the very individuals within that agency and ours must be affected adversely by it too.
Oh, there's a tremendous amount of problems with the personnel in the agency. Alcoholism, divorce rate is astronomical, psychological problems. They have all sorts of these problems because of the way the agency governs its people.
You were talking about some of the children, the kids, in the American compound. Where was that now?
That was in Bangkok.
In Bangkok. Would you mind talking a little about that?
Well, when we went out to Bangkok, this was my last tour in Thailand in '70. The previous tour, we had school, the international school, their American-run international school.
By the way, I imagine only live in a compound, do they not? Pretty much. They know the people.
Well, Bangkok was a pretty cosmopolitan city, but we lived in apartment houses that were pretty much international, Americans and other diplomats, things like that. when we'd been there before, the international school had been just almost like a traditional American high school. All the spirit and rah-rah that goes with, sports and everything. It was just a good school. We went back in 1970, and I just couldn't believe the place. I walked in there, and it was just like walking into a mist of anger and confusion and what all. And we lived in an apartment building, and one night we were sitting in there eating dinner, and someone banged on the door and opened the door, and the young girl said that her friend was on the roof threatening to jump off. She had taken some pills. And we went up there, and I grabbed her and took her down and with my wife, and we tried to calm her down, but she was just hysterical. And she had indeed taken an overdose. And a couple of weeks after that, the teenage boy, who was the son of a much decorated Marine colonel in Vietnam, took a near-fatal dose of heroin. And drugs were available all over the city. And right outside the international school, there's a little tea cart, and you could buy almost 100% pure heroin. You could buy marijuana. You could buy amphetamines. You could buy anything. And I think within a year's period, about 8 children died of drug overdoses. And
8 children of the American...
the American installation. And about 20% of the families had to be sent home because of drug-related problems.
So the very nature of the work itself, the fantasy, the deception, the secrecy, the violation of the whole tenets we believe in here, must have an effect on the families themselves.
Very much so.
Your boy had a problem too for a while.
Yes, he didn't want to stay there, and there's nothing we could do to keep him there. It was just a matter of he was going to run away, or he was going to let him go home, and he wouldn't go to school. He finally
Coming back to the work you were doing when you still had that feeling, even though the doubts were creeping in. I'm asking about something, Operation Mailbox, and I got to ask about that. This was an effective thing, which you had people of a village drop in the mailbox, those they think were communists or subversives. Couldn't that work badly, too, like a settling of grudges?
Well, I had made an adjustment to that. That was the process that was used in Malaya by the British. And what I had done is organize the 25-man team to go into the villages and interrogate and question everybody, and then compare the stories. And finally, we'd get a confession. And once we got a confession from one member of the communist movement, then he would have to name other people's. And finally, by the time we left the village, we'd know everybody in the movement. So we had a mechanism for, what you're saying is very true. It would be a way of accusing others, but we had a mechanism for adjusting to that and correcting the problem as we went along. But in Malaya, I'm very sure that's
but
exactly
the fact is you were very effective. I mean, you were very good in what you were doing.
There were other programs that I found the exact problem, that the people that we were training and paying and reporting to us were actually communists, and they were reporting the good guys as the bad guys, and vice versa.
So because we were there where we didn't belong in the first place.
Exactly.
That's boy. Now I'm thinking about you. Yours is a story, of course. We're not talking to someone who is the outsider. Not talking to someone who was the one putting down America. You were very much in it and for it all the way. You were at the heart of it. You were Walter McGehee.
I was in the operational directive, that element of the agency that gathers intelligence and overthrows governments, and very much a dedicated red, white, and blue American CIA case officer until I began to realize that the agency wasn't what it purported to be.
And what you said, casually, you said that it overthrows governments. That very phrase itself.
That's one of the most heinous operations that it conducted, that it used as a model in other countries. It occurred in Indonesia. We decided we wanted to get rid of President Sukarno. His government at that time consisted of a 3 million man strong PKI, Communist Party of Indonesia, and on the right you had the military and the landowners. Well, in '68, some young military officers tried a coup against some older military officers. The coup failed, but the agency saw this as an opportunity to overthrow the government of Sukarno. And I can't explain the details because I wrote this up for an article in The Nation, and they classified huge chunks of it. What I can say is a result of that operation, that CIA operation, 500,000 to 1 million innocent people were murdered.
And 500,000, a 500,000 people.
There's an officially admitted 500,000 people died. And estimates go to 1 million. And the reason I know about this operation, I hadn't served in Indonesia, but when I was my last 4 years in the agency, I worked in the International Communism branch, and I was custodian of the report about that operation. The report came in 2 segments. One, a book, Indonesia 1965, The Coup That Failed. It was published for the American people. It set forth all the illusions that the agency wanted to propagate about that situation. And then they had a secret annex that said, well, here's what really happened, and here's how we did it. And the reason the agency went to the trouble to pull this all together in a report format is that it works so well that we want to be able to use it in other countries of the third world. It's a model to be used in other countries of the third world.
On that subject, here we are today, talking in 1983, and you make reference to now Latin America, and there's El Salvador, and you have quite a bit of reference to that, too, as though it's almost a repeat, is it not?
It is indeed. I'm sure that the intelligence that's going back to the president is all justifying, the policies he's already decided upon, as it was in Vietnam, where we're doing exactly the same thing, and in Nicaragua now, where we're trying to overthrow the Sandinista government. As a matter of fact, I was on the border of that country last Sunday. Right up on the border in the area, talking to many of the people up there, mothers whose sons have been killed by the activities of the Contras, the CIA-sponsored groups. And
the border would be the
Honduras-Nicaraguan border.
What did you... Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, I was talking to the mothers whose sons have been killed. I talked to the military. I talked to the militia. I talked to the police. I talked to the government officials. And I talked to barrio defense committees, whole neighborhoods that are organized for the government. And of course, I had most of my information was coming from government people, but I had the outstanding impression that everybody is behind the Sandinista government. And I noticed in an article in the Washington Post a couple of days ago that the agency admitted that the people it was recruiting to overthrow this, or the people it was recruiting in this movement, the Somocistas, former Somozan National Guards, those were the only people they could recruit because they were the only ones that were for what was going on. And so it's just, we're trying to overthrow this very popular government with a very, very cruel group of people who, when they rule the government, were it's a total military dictatorship, very cruel.
It's as though nothing happened. Here we go again, don't we? That same theme. We know that in the 20s, a remarkable man, General Smedley Butler, the Marine commandant who people wanted to replace Roosevelt as president once upon a time, was leading groups chasing Sandino all over Nicaragua. And he came back and he wrote his memoirs. And he says, this is incredible. I was doing this for the banana fruit, for United Fruit Company and Anaconda Copper.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
But it's as though the past is a blank. This is what we're talking about, isn't it?
Our history is blanked out for us, I believe, and it's blanked out for us a lot by the agency disinformation that's aimed at the American public to convince them that what we're doing is correct. And we don't have an awful lot of memory of those events. And I think that's exactly what we're doing now. We're trying to impose another dictator over the country of Nicaragua that will allow multinational corporations the free reign of the country. And the people are so aware of this. The people in Nicaragua, this is what I talked to this mother out in this rural area who had lost her son, and she said, talking about the multinational corporations trying to reimpose the dictatorship, something that most Americans don't know. And here's this farm person, mother, knowing all about it. So they're so aware of what the realities are, and we are so innocent about the realities.
You use the word disinformation. Let's say, explain disinformation.
Well, disinformation is employs many techniques. It employs the techniques of forging documents, of planting weapon shipments and discovering them to justify policy, of doctoring photographs, the techniques of white, gray, and black propaganda, white propaganda being an official government announcement, a gray propaganda being where your source is fuzzy, it isn't obvious, and black propaganda is if you assume the identity of someone else, you speak in the name, say, of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and you issue decrees and such under that label. So you do all of these things to justify American policy, and in Vietnam, the agency loaded up to justify the introduction of American troops into that country, the agency loaded up a junk with weapons to say that the war was an invasion of South Vietnam by the North Vietnamese. But it didn't have any proof of that, so it loaded this junk up with weapons. It floated it up against the coast, shot it up, and then brought in the American press, the International Control Commission, said, here's all the proof we need. And based on this proof, the State Department wrote a white paper being the official government policy paper. And it said, here's the evidence, it's an invasion. So 1 week after this paper was written, 2 Marine Corps battalion landing teams went into Vietnam in a more active combat role, and a week later it began Operation Rolling Thunder, the sustained bombing of North Vietnam. The same thing happened in El Salvador. Just as President Reagan came to presidency, some documents were discovered linking all of our supposed enemies in a massive conspiracy to support one little element of a El Salvador resistance group, the PLO, East Germans, the Soviet Unions, the Cubans, Libyans, and what all. And all of this, these people had promised in this one document to support this group. This document was discovered, I'm sure it was a CIA forged document, and picked up, and a white paper was based on, the State Department issued a white paper, and because of that white paper, the Congress authorized monies for supporting the El Salvadoran government. And I think in the current days we can see the various misinformation campaigns, the Yellow Rain campaign, blaming the Soviets for chemical warfare in Laos and Cambodia, in Afghanistan, the Libyan hit teams. I can't think of there's others, but other disinformation campaigns. They're all undertaken to fool the Americans, sort of wave a red flag before the American people, so that they will be more easily led. And
you think now it's as much as ever. Now, this disinformation you're talking about that's fed by the CIA is more than it's ever been, or as much as it's ever been.
It's as much as it's been at its peak time. Yes, the agency at one time had what they call Wisner's Wurlitzer, an organ that he could play. Wisner was the director of operation. He could play anywhere in the world the propaganda theme that he wanted at any time. And it's one of my conclusions is that the Vietnam War was a total illusion as far as the American people knew, because what they were hearing from the agency's intelligence, from the agency's propaganda aimed at the American people, it was a total illusion. It had very little to do with what was going on in the country. It was the South Vietnamese who were, even according to President Eisenhower, had the Vietnamese been given a chance to vote for who they wanted, 80% of them would have voted for Ho Chi Minh. But we ignored this and said, well, it's an invasion from the north. And when the American troops went in there, who were they fighting? They weren't fighting North Vietnamese, they were fighting South Vietnamese.
You point out some of the history of Vietnam and the French role, and you point out the OSS, which was the predecessor. You know, Bill Donovan's group, OSS, predecessor CIA, worked with the Viet Minh of Ho, and they saved many American downed pilots.
Right, and Ho Chi Minh was trying to become a good friend of the United States. He said, please don't let the French reimpose their colonial rule over. We have established our own nation here. We will even be a trusteeship of the United Nations. He wrote, I think, 8 letters to President Truman. The OSS, because of all the things that the Ho was doing for the American pilots and what all, gave him 5,000 weapons and ammunition, trained his army, and he, in fact, created the Viet Minh Army, and marched into Hanoi with him when the war was over, and helped establish the government there. And our political leaders said, no, we're going for our own purposes. We're not going to accept Ho Chi Minh.
So when OSS changed the CIA, well, the Cold War was just now
beginning,
hardening.
Yes.
And so that was all part of it. So, and now the grand deceptions began. Deception is the way, I suppose it culminated with Tonkin Gulf.
Yes, the Tonkin Gulf incident. Though there was all a deception. The agency created the Diem government. It scared the North Viet during the 300-day Geneva truce period. It scared the North Vietnamese and Catholics to come to the South. It created and then trained them and created a government and imposed them over the South Vietnamese. And its intelligence said, well, Diem has done this all on his own without any outside help. This was its intelligence lying about what it itself had done. And from that point forward until 1975, its intelligence was just sheer illusion. And at the same time, its intelligence was very similar to the propaganda aimed at the American people to convince them that this was a legitimate.
So now it's happening, of course, as we see.
It's the same thing is happening in Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras.
Boy. And what's the phrase you use? You think of Orwell, 1980, the Ministry of Truth.
The Ministry of Truth.
Ironically used.
It rewrites history, and that's.
Ralph McGeehee, 25 years, has a career button on your lapel.
Yes.
And his career button is CIA. Case officer. I assume you're a key figure, the case officer
Yes.
is. So you're in the field. Perhaps you should read this. There's so much in this book. The book is Deadly Deceits, and my guest is Ralph McGeehee, and subtitled My 25 Years in the CIA, and the book is published by Sheridan Square Publications. It's a small company, but a very courageous one that is publishing books of this nature. But there's I want you to read this, the conclusion you come to, perhaps to say it or read it, either way.
The CIA is not now, nor has it ever been, a central intelligence agency. It's the covert action arm of the President's foreign policy advisors. In that capacity, it overthrows or supports foreign governments while reporting intelligence, in quotes, justifying those activities. It shapes its intelligence, even in such critical areas as Soviet nuclear weapon capability, to support presidential policy. Disinformation is a large part of its covert action responsibility, and the American people are the primary target audience of its lies.
What I just ask you now, Ralph, thoughts, suggestions. So what is your word now to listeners and to others? Your suggestions.
The CIA should be abolished and a real intelligence agency created. It's no problem to create an intelligence agency. All you have to do is have the will to want the truth.
Like the OSS, in other words, something like that.
Something like that, right. It's really no problem. If you want to gather intelligence, it's just there. But our leaders don't want intelligence. They want information that will support policies that they've already decided upon. We are now in an extremely explosive situation in Central America. If the American President Reagan sends American troops into that area, or if the war heats up in Nicaragua, I think it's going to expand beyond the confines of Nicaragua. And the people there are so much behind the government, it's my impression, that they're so committed to that government because it's giving them a fair break. And we're trying to overthrow that to impose a dictatorship. And they know exactly what's happened. They're not deceived at all. They know exactly what's happened. So we're facing another critical situation such as Vietnam, and we ought to find some way to stop it. How, I don't know.
Ralph McGeehee, I'm thinking about you, and as I look at you, you've come a long way, haven't you?
Very long, very long. I feel now that all the personal agony is sort of being justified or whatever, but because I'm allowed, I'm saying these things, and maybe I can help prevent another situation of this sort.
My guest, Ralph W. McGehee. And, well, needless to say, the book is quite something indeed. Deadly Deceits, his book, My 25 Years in the CIA, Sheridan Square Publications. And if it isn't available in your store, ask for it. I think it'll be soon be available at the Guild Bookstore here, I know, on Lincoln, but you can ask at the other stores, too, for it. I would say it's important must-reading, as John Stockwell, the former CIA officer, who in Africa says that more effective than any ex-CIA author, McGeehee deals with the anguish of a principled man seeking a career in the CIA. Deadly Deceits takes the patriotic honor student Notre Dame football star into the CIA through 2.5 decades of deadly struggles in Southeast Asia, and Ramsey Clark, too, speaks of it. It's a powerful work indeed, essential reading, which indeed it is, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ralph McGehee.